We are just days away from the counting to the 17th Lok Sabha general elections. But counting being such a mammoth exercise, how do you think it is done? Here is an explainer for you. So let's start with the preparation that happens for the counting. Usually the returning officer that is in charge of a parliamentary constituency or an assembly constituency for that matter decides the place of counting at least 1 week before the day of polling. Yes, you heard it right, 1 week before the day of polling. So he has to ensure, he discusses with the police for adequate protection and security and then decides on a place. The place usually should be big enough, should be a permanent structure, should have adequate lighting and all other facilities because counting is such a mammoth exercise. So once the time and place is decided, usually the date is decided by the Election Commission of India and the counting takes place across the country on the same date. The time is usually 8 AM. So the time and place is then notified to the candidates on a special notice saying, we have decided to count votes and so date at so and so time. So the notice also asks the candidates to nominate somebody known as the counting agents who usually sits at the counting table and then verifies if the counting is going on the right way or the wrong way. So each candidate can nominate up to 16 counting agents per place of counting. As you may know, each parliamentary constituency is made of assembly segments. In some states it could go up to 10 assembly segments per parliamentary constituency, in some states it could be 4. So the counting also takes place per assembly segment. So in the counting hall you can have 2 different halls that are simultaneously counting assembly segments. But in cases where such halls are not available, 2 or more assembly segments can be counted in the same hall as per rules. But in such case what happens is only when one assembly segment is counted, only when that process is over, the counting for the next assembly segment starts. There could also be cases where there are simultaneous elections for the parliament, I mean the Lok Sabha as well as the state assembly. So in such cases in the same hall, simultaneous counting takes place for both the assembly as well as the Lok Sabha. So you have one half dedicated for counting the assembly and one half dedicated for counting the Lok Sabha. The counting usually takes place in rounds. So each round certain number of polling stations are counted. Now you might ask me, how are these rounds decided? So the number of rounds usually depend on the number of polling stations in a particular constituency. So you will have, so the most important thing is to understand the number of tables that are available in the counting hall. So in the counting hall usually there could be an arrangement of 7 plus 1, in other words 7 counting tables and 1 table for the returning officer where the observer sits, where the candidate and his election agent sits. There could be cases where it could be 14 plus 1 where 14 tables for the counting and 1 for the returning officer. In special cases permission has to be taken from the Election Commission of India in case you want to use more number of tables. So like in the case of Telangana for instance, on the 23rd when the counting happens, in some places like Nizamabad 19 tables are being used, in some places like Medchal, LB Nagar 29 tables are being used. The simple reason being there are too many polling stations in these constituencies. So once the number of tables is decided, then automatically you will have number of rounds based on the number of polling stations and the tables are arranged accordingly. Usually the first round of counting is always of the postal ballots. The postal ballots are brought in because these are physical ballots. Of course now there are electronic ballots for certain service people, but the postal ballots are usually counted in the first round. There is also a rule which says the counting of the EVMs can start 30 minutes after the postal ballot counting starts. So in fact there was a rule which says the postal ballot count should be completed before the penultimate round of EVMs. In other words, you're approaching the last round of the EVM counting and you still have postal ballots left, you can't start the last round. But recently the rules have been changed because of a large number of postal ballots and it says both of them can go on simultaneously. So once the EVM counting starts, there is a process that has to be followed. In other words, you have in the as you know, in the EVM there are 2 units. One is a control unit which is at the presiding officer and the ballot unit where the voter actually presses the button. For the purpose of counting, only the control unit is brought to the counting place. So sequentially these control units are distributed across tables. So the polling station 1 control unit is given to table 1, polling station number 2 is given to table 2 and so on. So once these are brought in, certain mandatory checks are made. So for instance, if the seal is not broken, if the serial number is same, the candidates agents which we called as counting agents before, they all cross check this. Once everything is intact, you also bring in something known as form 17C. You remember form 17C is nothing but where the list of all the votes is recorded. So how many voters have come, how many male, how many female, how many tendered votes and things like that. So that form is also brought in. Once everybody agrees that things are intact, then the actual process of counting starts. The actual process of counting is a very simple thing. So on the control unit, there is a button called result. So once the result button is pressed, it gives on counts of votes given to candidates as it is on the form. So you have on the ballot paper, you have names sequentially, first the recognized parties, then the registered parties, then independents, etc. So the results are then recorded. So if it is actually shown up and shown to the counting agent so that they are sure of how many votes they got. So if they are not convinced, the process is repeated again, you press the button again, you see all the results. So once all these results are compiled, they are compiled into the form 17C again. So there is part 2 in the form 17C where votes obtained by various candidates from that specific control unit, which means specific polling station, are recorded. So when everyone is satisfied with all that, this particular form 17C then goes to the returning officer, who again satisfies himself and sends it to another official who keeps on compiling all the information from various polling booths, and he is in charge of compiling something known as form 20, which we will discuss later. The next question is, when are VVPAT slips counted? You know, we all saw those slips when we press the ballot unit. Now VVPAT slips are counted in 3 different cases. Not possible that they are counted in all 3 instances, but there are possibilities. The first one is, as per the recent Supreme Court order, in every assembly segment 5 polling stations are randomly selected and their VVPAT slips are counted. Secondly, if any control unit fails, for instance this control unit was used for elections but for some reason it is not showing the results because of technical issues, then the VVPAT slips for that constituent, for that particular polling station, are used for counting. The third case could be a candidate could request VVPAT counting because he is not satisfied with the control unit, or there could be cases where some voter has complained that the VVPAT slips was not counting properly, or whatever could be the reason. And please understand, just because a candidate requests it, it is not accepted. The returning officer is the final authority. It is his discretion whether he wants to accept that request or not. So that is the third case. If the RO accepts, then VVPAT counting happens. Then there is another question. What happens if the VVPAT count does not tally with the EVM count? There could be cases where the VVPAT is showing X and the EVM count is showing X plus 1. The rules clearly say that if there is a discrepancy between the VVPAT count and the EVM count, then the VVPAT count will prevail and the result will be adjusted accordingly. So this is what happens with the VVPATs. Then you should also remember, the for the purpose of VVPAT counting, there are special boxes designed in the form of pigeonholes, which you will see in the pictures that we are showing. So these special boxes are used for the VVPAT counting. And finally, after all this process is over, then comes the result, when everything is over. And in the meanwhile, after every round, on the blackboard, there is a blackboard within the counting hall where these things are written, round-wise results are written, and they are announced on the loudspeaker. So TV channels that tell you on round 1, round 2, this is the lead position, it is based on these results that are given by the Election Commission. Then comes the announcement of result. Once the entire counting process is over and nobody is contesting the election, then comes the result. So all the polling station wise results are captured in something known as form 20. So form 20 is nothing but it has a list of all the polling stations in a specific assembly segment. Then it also has the list of votes obtained by each candidate. Everything is tabularized and then summarized. Then the RO will check the veracity if everything is fine. Then before he goes on to announce the result, he will wait for the candidates. If anyone wants to contest and ask for a recount, and if nobody is asking for a recount, then he goes on to announce the results on a loudspeaker as well as in form 20, and a copy of the form 20 is given to them. There is also something known as form 21C, which is like the summarized version of form 20, which is then signed by the returning officer, and the name is written as it is in the affidavit and sent to various bodies like the ECI, like the Lok Sabha Secretary General, like to the Law Ministry, etc. And finally, to the candidate, if I am the candidate, how will I know I won? So I will also be given a certificate of election in form 22 if it's a parliamentary general election, and that form 22 certifies that candidate, with my name, I have won this election. So the candidates use this in the Lok Sabha or in the state assembly to get themselves registered as the official member from that constituency. And it might look very simple, but this is how complex the counting process is. What we see on TV is just the summarized results, but there is a lot of process that goes behind. Hope you liked our video. Please like, share and subscribe to Factly.